This is about growing up and why places matter. And I'm David Epstein. I'm the design director here in the Austin office of Gensler. Gensler is a global architecture, planning, interiors firm. And we have an office here in Gensler, here in Austin. So quite excited to be here at South by Southwest and bringing talents like this around. It's a great time to be in Austin. The energy, the power of everything is so exciting. So this group is really exceptional, and we have an hour. I'm sure we could go on for quite a while, but we're going to do this in an hour. And to my left here is Marcus Ferris, who was a moment ago, the Dezeen magazine. He's the developer of it, online magazine. I think they have it's a tremendous mission. It's a simple mission. It's to bring to you a carefully edited selection of the best architecture, design, interior projects from around the world. And I wrote down, you get 3 million hits, and you just said in your presentation now you get 10 million people a month seeing the work. So it's incredible how it's done. And I must say, not knowing you at all, I have one of your watches. So I'm like like one of those test markets when, as an architect, looking at your site so often, and then, I'll buy a watch. So it's working, indeed. Next to him is Charles Armstrong. He's the founder of the Trampery, which is a London-based social enterprise that designs, operates spaces for startups, for creativity and innovation. And their mission is that we create beautiful working environments and help their members achieve impossible things. And then next to him is Richard Gibbs, who is the business development of HereEast. And there's a tremendous exhibition over here of what HereEast is all about. What's exciting about HereEast is, once where Olympians made gold, now people can go there and make things in reusing the facilities that are there at the Olympic Park. So it's a very exciting endeavor. And then lastly is Kevin. Kevin Johns is here in Austin. He's the director of economic development department, the city of Austin. His department leads, and I think this is fascinating, it's not only global business recruitment and urban regeneration and small business development, but also under the same department is cultural arts and the music efforts of Austin, Texas. And seeing art and commerce together in one department is, I think, really, really amazing. So with that group, I've got a few questions to get us going, and we'll see how it all works out. I would guess because of this stacked deck that I have, and we're talking about place, and does place really matter? I'd imagine most of you guys say, yes, place does matter, but in this time of a digital world, what does it really mean to make great places, and do those places really affect how we as humans create things? And with that, I'm opening this up to everybody. So.
I knew that if I got last onto the stage, I'd get the microphone first. But actually, the whole idea of place has been on my mind the last few days. I've never been to Austin before. I'm a European boy. I love European cities. And we're staying in this motel on the edge of town, on the highway, in the rain. Let me tell you, place really matters. It has affected my mood so much, I feel pathetic. And the sun came out this morning, and I walked out. I opened the curtain of what I'd considered like a hovel of a room, and suddenly it looked a lot better, and it changed my mood, and I was able to be more productive and more creative. But absolutely, I think place matters. And I want to make another point as well, that yesterday I had a great conversation with a designer called Gadi Amit, who does a lot of work on wearable technology and stuff like that, and he was saying the problem with technology, the problem with wearables, the problem with Google Glass is it doesn't address the emotional. It's all clever, how, big data, all that kind of stuff. It's like human emotion is really, really profoundly important, and place affects emotion, and you can't do good stuff if your emotions are all screwed up.
Even in a virtual world.
Just to avoid tangling your legs up. So I think 20 years ago, if you told people that we'd be sitting here having a discussion, spending time talking about place, they'd probably have been quite surprised, because you look back to the kind of very early years of the web, and that period of the digital revolution when people were extrapolating of all of the trends they'd seen over the previous decades and putting those new technologies and essentially the web into the picture with that. I think a lot of people believed that place wasn't going to matter anymore, that suddenly everything would become disembodied and weightless. And the idea that you'd be gathering people together into buildings to work would look ridiculously old-fashioned, and the idea that working communities in a physical way would be important would come to look ridiculous, that everything would happen virtually, that all of the limitations of physical space would be overcome. And you read things that people wrote then, and like cast your mind back, it actually seemed to make sense at the time. And now all of those predictions look completely balmy, don't they? And I think very centrally around innovation, it's extremely striking that geographical, physical clusters have come right back into focus for corporations, for entrepreneurs, for investors, and also for governments and policymakers. Like, people understand, almost in a medieval kind of structure, that if you want to have a fizz of ideas and you want to be really making the most of the assets and resources you've got, then bringing people together into the same place is the way that works best. So I think that it's a great moment to be having this discussion, because like, we know enough now to be able to say that the predictions and hypotheses of 20 years ago were just wrong. And actually, there's this whole new question about what the fusion of the physical spaces and the virtual tools can offer. And that's why Mark's previous talk was very interesting, well, 'cause it's starting to touch on some of those questions.
With that, I would like to sort of ask now the more reality, the physical, and both of you guys, between Hackney and Austin, what are those attributes besides the roadside motel that make us special, different, that why we're here today and, you know, here in Austin, and what are the special ingredients? Is it because both Hackney and Austin have pubs and we have bars? I mean, what is it that makes it special as a physical place? Why are things like this happening?
Hey, everybody. How many people are from Austin? Okay, so we got a good army here, so I think I'm well supported. I think that the biggest similarity is that both Austin and Hackney really love and appreciate creative people. The guts of our economic strategy is based upon the Richard Florida concept of attracting creative people. Just get smart people, ignore their race, their color, their religion, any of the biases, but try and just get creative people to your community. Use the cultural diversity that we have as a strength to help us compete in a global marketplace. And I think both communities are doing that. Hackney has the largest concentration of artists in Europe. During the recession in Austin, we did a snapshot of our creative industry. I think everybody here, since so many of you are from Austin, know that we're the top economy in America. But during the recession, it was very interesting. We took a snapshot, and while the other industries that were not creative started to flatten or decline, our creative communities grew 25% and kept us to be the top economy in America. And so we did a deep analysis of it and go, we are right at the decision-making that we are doing to create and encourage the creative class so that Austin becomes a prototype for how communities of the future grow. We're right on target. So if there's one thing that I think that both communities have, is this high concentration of very creative, smart people, where if they come to you for an idea, in Austin, people will go, hey, I know somebody who can help you do that, or hey, I can connect you, or I know some financing, or let's put that online. If you go to other cities, a lot of other cities, especially in the government, they'll say, let me tell you why that won't work. You know, you'll never get through this, permits, you'll never get through this. So anyway, I think the high amount of creativity is part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and it's fascinating to plot, as I've done, the kind of move of that creative, well, you know, the famous creative classes across London from the 50s, based in sort of Chelsea, moving 60s into Soho, and then moved into Shoreditch, and then have moved to Hackney and East Hackney, where we're based with HereEast in Hackney Wick. And behind that, you can see the sort of development of commercial opportunity in the wake of that move. what I find refreshing really about the sort of creative digital class, particularly in Hackney and East London, is just how parochial they are, and actually get very very territorial about their particular district and road, and sometimes miss the irony of that actually they respond in a way that only my grandparents used to respond about, but I wouldn't want to go to that side of the road. And it's and I think it's the point that Marcus was wearing. It's a very emotional. You need to belong somewhere. Belonging is critical, and technology is wonderful, but it is by its very nature disruptive, and that's challenging. And I think it's almost as a requirement of that you need to feel part of a place. And I think as other aspects of society kind of have been challenged, we've formed ourselves into other groupings or tribes or whatever, where we can regain that kind of relationship, and place is something that is at this stage important, and we certainly see that in the way that we're trying to develop. That emotional tie is crucial. The brightest, sharpest people have said to me, I could sit there talking to them about the cost of real estate and all of that, and all they really want to know is how cool is it going to be. It's bizarre that the most intelligent people are making those kind of questions. But of course, I applaud that, because that is the right question. They want to be somewhere that is comfortable. Most important, they want somewhere that they will be inspired. And in a sense, it's the other issues that are secondary.
When you speak about that and you take it from community to place, when you think about workplace today, and when you think about all the glory of the big companies in America, we hear it quite often. HP started in a garage, Apple started in a garage. Here in our town, Dell started in a dorm. Those kind of places created something very special. They weren't designed to create those things. And then you start thinking about even those companies and others beyond, now they're creating places to make that thing that they know they're now making. How does that stay at the edge? How do you create places that feel like have the potential for the innovation like those companies once had, or companies that are growing into that scale? What do you see around the world that sparks that kind of imagination that's far more at a structured level? It's moved out of the garage to something more. So what kind of things make it that connect you back to places where you can feel like that authentic, cool, something about it is working and making this group of people do things they never thought they could do?
Oh, no, not again. I'm going to move over there. Well, this is not the answer you want. I think it often comes down to luck. I mean, yes, places are important. Places attract clusters of vibrant human beings for reasons which can be put on a spreadsheet, but also random things happen. The random genius can build a team around him and start something. And also, I think in London we're very proud of our sort of startup culture in places like Shoreditch, but where's the stay-up culture? I mean, we haven't proven yet that we can build those businesses of the scale that you have in the States. The States manages to get that scale, don't they? It's a constant conversation in London of yes, we have the creative ideas. Yes, cool stuff happens at the sort of garage level, but is that sustained? And I don't know whether that's about investment or whether it's about ambition or cultural values, or is it the fault of the art schools for turning us all, producing left-leaning hippie types who actually want to destroy.
Thousands of years you guys pushing yourself down too.
Yeah,
that's it.
But I'm sure that luck plays a huge role in all this as well.
I think Marcus is absolutely right that luck is a central factor, and it's part of the reason that clusters are so important, and also that well-designed offices are so important, because they help to mold chance encounters and bring people together who aren't necessarily expecting that they've got something interesting to talk about. And that's where a lot of innovation grows up from. But to your question about what we can do with spaces that helps them to be fertile for innovation, aside from thinking about them very carefully so that they provoke coincidences and crossovers. I think also spaces that constantly change is a central thing. If you have a working environment that everything stays basically the same week after week, month after month, then you can get very fixed into your habits. I think there's a very, very interesting connection between the way we think, our working habits, and the environment we're in. And certainly with the Trampery, we try to find ways to constantly have change in an environment. And part of that is about the fact that there are businesses growing and shrinking all the time. And so we're moving desks around. We try to keep teams on contiguous units. And actually, if the floor plan's changing month by month, your walk routes change. It means you're passing by different people. And it actually has quite an interesting effect. But also, we're bringing in new decorative items, so there are always new things to play with. And we try to stage event programs so that there are completely different communities coming in and out. And there's just something about the feeling of a working environment that you know you're going to come in next week and something's going to be different than it is now, that it keeps a kind of alertness, that I have a strong sense that increases the general level of ambient innovation and energy that there is in the space.
You know, I think with that, I would add, like, when I'm thinking about it now, your co-working that you've been doing, oftentimes what we are asked to do is we're working for a company, like you did in the 19th century at least, that does a widget. You know, they start here, they produce it, they build it over there, and we create a workplace that's very efficient on the making of that product as it goes through it. How different is it of a co-working place where there's many different individuals doing many different things in that space? And maybe that's a bit what you just talked about the scale and changing. Is there anything else to add about what you think about as how to a successful co-working place?
Yes, I just add one very specific point on that, because like what you highlighted is still the case with a lot of big office buildings, that essentially you've got a similar design approach to a 19th century factory, that you're designing around process, around something mechanical, around a rationalization of a business model. I think what co-working spaces represent, and which is also starting to infiltrate and have implications for large corporations, is that you're designing for social outcomes. You're not designing for productive processes in a linear way anymore. You're designing environments that are fundamentally about people and about unpredictable human activities.
Trying to increase that chance of luck that something could happen, you know, something that you don't know about will happen because of the process. And I would guess like HereEast, that must have been a lot of the thought about flexibility, about making a place where these things can happen that you don't know what they're going to be.
I mean, I think critically, because HereEast is, though it is actually a piece of real estate, our approach has always been from a business development perspective, and we would have failed if we had approached this as a simple real estate developer would have done. In fact, no real estate developer wanted to take it on. And it was only when we looked at this proposition in terms of understanding what were the kind of business opportunities, what was really happening in the commercial world, that we saw the opportunity. And what is happening is massive disruption, so that there is no fixed office anymore, or increasingly no fixed office, because every business is being disrupted. As I say, schools are beginning to look like businesses, and businesses are beginning to look like schools, and every business you look at is changing its model. I mean, the Pearson stand that I've just been into in the convention centre is a large UK business that's changed completely in a very short space of time. And in terms of HereEast, what we've understood is that you've got a large range of small businesses that are trying to scale. That's critical for them. But ironically, you've got very large businesses of scale trying to be creative. And what I discovered in talking to large businesses, some of them considered very bright, very creative in the UK, is that they were genuinely scratching their head, realizing that they were being continually threatened. and being disrupted by new designs, new inventions, but not knowing how they could embrace this. And in a sense, what we're trying to do in here is just create a space where both those smaller dynamic businesses can come alongside larger businesses. And as Charles said, by clever design, but only design then, understanding what the strategy is first, then try and apply the design that will make that coincidence fruitful. And we're in a state, and will continue to be in a state of flux. We have some ideas that we're putting out that are actually demonstrated here, but we will be refining that all the time to try and make that work. We don't come in with a master plan, that dreaded word, because we know if we have a master plan, it'll be redundant tomorrow. And I know Charles will agree with this. The problem that a lot of what's going on in East London at the moment is that people are coming in with a fixed view of what people want in terms of space. And actually, it'll be redundant so quickly. And what we've got to build into our process in here is an ability to shape and revise very, very rapidly, but always being driven by the kind of business imperative, what it is that the people want.
I think what we're also talking about here is an unknown future, but how do you predict that future? And I think, Kevin, it's quite interesting what we're doing here in Austin, using supercomputers to try to predict a future. And maybe you could speak a little bit about how that data is kind of affecting how we're actually making things here.
Yeah, thank you. I think what I'm hearing is some really wonderful ideas about how this can happen, or it might be luck, it might be happenstance, but also the commercial side of it. Austin's strategy is to blend city planning and economic development together. We want to use the cultural diversity as a strength, but we want to measure it in outcomes, in jobs, in taxes, in increased disposable income. We want to use the Cultural Arts Division, the city's galleries, the $7 million in contracts they give to 250 contractors every year, as a way to revitalize our commercial areas. We want our music division to be able to work with the music vendors so that they're in every city commercial area. We want to use our family business loan program, our microloan program, our loan program just for musicians, to blend together really great placemaking and city planning and economic development. The creative economy in Austin is $4.6 billion. It supports 49,000 jobs, and it generates $71 million in net new taxes. So it's a very, very valuable way that we have to operate. So we've developed a plan first on how we use creativity and culture in Austin domestically, and then how we expand it to include a global network of science cities. So we have places like Austin, but in other locations around the world where our businesses can expand, where they get a soft landing, where there's the rule of law. And Hackney is our first partner. So if you do a football analogy, Hackney and Austin are strikers on a soccer team. And we're using those to try and find 10 or 11 other cities around the world to capture more of the global trade that'll help us. So we're looking at placemaking on that level too. But the last point, I think, is that we've developed a new tool using the university's supercomputer Stampede. And with a Sustainable Places grant of $3.6 million, we're the first city in the world that has organized new software called Envision Tomorrow software, that you can look at a proposed development scenario and you can run the return on investment. And you can determine whether you're going to make money or not for the city, whether the community makes money or not. It's to eliminate the economic blind side of placemaking. Everybody knows that if artists are in a community, that's really great. That really helps the community grow. But it also creates gentrification. There's also a lot of techniques that we're still learning on this. So I would say we tested this new tool, the economic supercomputer platform, on the urban rail system for those of you who are in Austin. We overlaid it by about a mile around a completed, if the urban rail system was built. So it was a green trail system we overlaid on it. And we ran the numbers, and without the urban rail system, it would be $29 billion worth of development. With it, it'll be 31, so a $2 billion bump. And if people in that area use the rail system, it would generate $107 million net new taxes just because you were in proximity to it as a amenity. $107 million net new taxes every year. Well, think what that would do to the city's budget. Secondly, we ran the supercomputer on the family incomes in the area. And if people use the trails to bike or walk or just use their car less, that area, which would be about 300,000 people, the average income, a family income, would go up tremendously. And it would capture, if 5% of the people use the rail system, it would generate another $290 million a year just for that area to be captured. And where would they spend the money? 69% of the money would be spent in local businesses. So it's a revitalization tool. It would create 2,300 jobs. So the Austin strategy, if we have a secret agreement, it's to kind of organize with our merchants associations and citywide how to take culture and arts and move it into all our commercial areas domestically to strengthen the community so that we have little Hispanic areas, we have little Asian areas, but do it in a very smart way. And then a global strategy, and then we're measuring it all on the return on investment. I'm sorry, my friends at Georgia Tech said I never stop talking, so I'm...
That's good. It always gets back to money in the U.S. So anyway, we always talk about that. But when it comes to co-working, one thing is about a generosity of ideas. When you're co-working and you're out there together, independently, in sections and groups, wide open, basically, of ideas. How does that work in a world when we read in the newspaper every day that Samsung's suing Apple this week, Apple's suing Samsung next week on ideas? How do you make people feel comfortable that that co-working is the way of the future and it works in your place, especially Charles? I think maybe you could add on to how it really works every day of co-working.
Delighted to. Well, so the majority of the businesses in the Trampery, and they range from software and web businesses to architecture and furniture design to fashion design, so covering quite a wide spectrum, but almost every single one is building their business on intellectual property of one kind or another, whether that's fashion designs or algorithms. And so this is a very central question, because if people weren't comfortable that the environment they were in was supporting the central pillar of their business, they wouldn't want to be in that environment. And so one of the central things that we strive to do in the Trampery is to create trust between our members. And there are elements to do with the design and architecture that help with that, but moreover, it's lots of elements about the culture. So for one thing, having a relatively low churn rate is very helpful for this. If you have the same businesses in an environment in a fairly consistent way, and they'll all be growing and changing configuration, but a kind of familiarity and trust develops between them over time. So it isn't constantly new, unknown people coming in, or a huge pool of people where just a few of them are dropping in at any point. You have a fairly consistent core group of people. And once you've established that trust, then not only are people more relaxed about discussing potentially quite sensitive aspects of what they're doing, there's also much more of a proclivity to start to collaborate and to start to develop ideas together. So establishing that basic fabric of trust is probably the single most important thing, not just for IP protection, but also for the general value that's created in the community. Secondly, spatial solutions that are about protecting intellectual property are also important. So for instance, for the fashion businesses, when it comes up to Fashion Week twice a year, they become hypersensitive, because everybody wants to know what their designs are going to be that are on the catwalk shows. There have already been cases where designs have been leaked, have been copied by a big retailer and have hit the shops in a slightly altered form within a week of Fashion Week. And that means that's economically devastating. So that means that every one of those businesses for the several weeks running up to Fashion Week, they need to be completely secluded. So they actually have their own studios. And they also have storage areas which are completely self-contained and heavily secured. And ways that event spaces are used for castings are very carefully controlled through that period as well. We've got one of the fintech businesses that's in one of our spaces. That's one of our larger businesses now, at 15 people. They're carrying on their servers very sensitive data from a lot of the world's largest financial institutions. They're a back-end reconciliation business. And so they've been the most extreme case of IP requirements that we've had to date, because they firmly want to be part of a Trampery community and want to socially engage with all of the other businesses. At the same time, a condition of their client contracts is that they're in a secure perimeter where they conform to ISO whatever specification. So we've created a secure cell within a shared working environment that meets those requirements, but they've got a door that they can open that then they come out into the shared cafe area. So it does require a lot of thought, because IP is central to a lot of the most important businesses that are growing up. But it turns out that it's absolutely compatible with being in a shared environment and all of the benefits that come from that.
You know, when I listen to that, I think, what happens when those babies leave that nest? Like those companies, have you seen them grow large enough they've left, and this is such a secure, great place you've made that they can't duplicate that place, or they try to make a place like that, this special place? Have you seen that happen?
Well, my assumption when we started was that businesses, when they reached 6 or 7 people, and if they were successful, they'd be able to afford their own place and they'd move out, and we'd kind of keep friendly contact with them, but they'd be gone. That hasn't proven to be the case so far. That we've got businesses like the one I mentioned that have been through several strands of investment. They're generating quite a lot of revenue. They're at a size they could easily afford their own place, but it's lovely for us that they want to remain as part of the community, and it means we have to keep getting more buildings to put them in. So that's been a very exciting part of the picture, because really, as Richard was saying, there's huge value in having businesses of different sizes in the same environment. They can learn from each other. There are the reseller and supplier relationships that are possible. The other side of the coin is the businesses that have then moved out from the environment. We've definitely seen them try to create communities around themselves. And I do think that we're going to see a whole generation of businesses now that had their first steps in shared working environments, where that's become part of their culture. And whatever they go on to do, they'll want to try and keep an ecosystem around them that isn't just their employees.
Can I just pick up a point? Again, it's back to a kind of strategic, what I think is a probably even a tipping point in business at the moment. Certainly what we've identified, and we're in a very lucky position to be able to be seeing so many and talking to so many different businesses as they kind of struggle with relocation, and it's an indication of where the temperature is. And I think the tipping point is, and dear old Michael Porter, he will turn in his grave, as it were. But we're moving away from, I think, a world where it's always about competitive advantage to potentially a world which is about collaborative advantage. And it strikes me that those businesses, be it small or large, are the ones that have worked in large businesses around bringing in a whole range of alliances to work together, very successfully, seeing that totally different but absurd sectors can inform what they're doing. So we have an advanced propulsion centre proposal in at the moment, being led by your mighty Ford, but they're working with games manufacturers to inform them. And actually they were fascinated by the Rolly keyboard, because they thought that actually that technology could be applied to steering wheels. And so suddenly you would get a musical instrument informing the next generation of cars. Yesterday in the panel, some of the small startups all talked about the advantage of collaborating. And even at a huge macro scale, I think the huge advantage is of places, Austin and Hackney, beginning to find ways that they can collaborate will give us, only through that will provide us with a competitive edge. But we're at a beginning of that, and how that will manifest itself in the physical form kind of has to evolve. But evolve it sure will.
I was listening to both of these last conversations, and like what Charles was saying earlier, imagine that for a whole city. That's what Austin is trying to do. And then you look at HereWest, and we want our companies to have a soft landing there, because every company, high-tech company that expands to Hackney at HereWest then becomes a global headquarters here. The whole organization in the macro part, I'm glad you touched bases on that. There is an association of all the science parks, all the research triangle parks for the whole planet. It's called the International Association of Science Parks. And we applied for membership, and they said, you're not a science park. And so we applied as a science city, because we feel that science parks alone are kind of outdated. People want to live in Hackney. They want to live in Austin. They want to live in places where there's a creative community. And we were selected, voted by the entire membership as the first science city, and that's why we're working with Tech City and why we're working with 10 other cities around. I think this whole issue of place is so important, not only locally, but at the macro scale. And if we can do what Charles was saying, but imagine an Austin like that in the future, then I think we can see a prototype for how communities of the future will grow.
You know, one thing that definitely comes up when thinking about that, thinking about place and thinking about authentic place. So often, I think back to you, Marcus, you have to stay awake for this, that it seems like the world that we live in today is make it cool, make it hip, you know, put a food truck inside. There's so many cliches about what this modern world we're living in is. How do you make those places more authentic? How do you discern when you see thousands of emails of images, what's real, what's not real, what you've seen again, and you move on to the next thing in the world that we see more than we've ever seen? I think, you know, humans of this generation, we're seeing more than someone 100 years ago could see in 300 years. You see it in seconds as it goes in front of you. So how do you make sure that you're trying to make something authentic real, to make these creative spaces where luck will maybe happen?
Oh God, that's the hardest question of all. Oh my God, I have no idea. But shall I just say something random about something else? No, but isn't there an article? I started reading it, but I didn't finish it. Corey Doctorow wrote in The Guardian today about Shoreditch being over, or something like that. Was the gist of it? Yeah. Okay, so that's how life is, right? So an area gets a vibe, it has a look, it has a, you know, the Shoreditch thing, you know what it is. It's battered sofas, it's kind of low tables, it's people working and sipping coffee and stuff like that. And it gets cloned, it gets copied, and then suddenly everyone decides that's over and they move on somewhere else. And that's just the kind of the brutal cycle of fashion, yeah. And then, of course, the other argument, which I hear all the time, because you may have guessed, audience, I'm not from the same world as them, so I'm sort of trying to throw bricks in from the side, is that the cost of things. I mean, of course, rising office rates is a good thing because it means more revenue for the council, and it's a sign of business success. But for a business like mine, it's an absolute disaster. So I think the big fear of London, let's not make out that Hackney, that Shoreditch is the answer. It's done really, really well, and it's built something which is genuinely a moment. But let's not get too complacent and arrogant and try to say to everyone, you must copy our model, because the price of accommodation is literally killing people. It's all my friends talk about how expensive it is to stay in London.
It's finding that new next thing to survive. You know, like what makes the most sense. I think, you know, here this is an example of it. You know, a used space that, you know, we quickly designed, but it is designed at a very low tech kind of experience and how it's put together and trying to make it work. Obviously not enough lights, but it does, you know, sort of bring on that kind of, the world that we live in today is a raw kind of world of making things work, doing things maybe electronically and not physically, how all those things connect. And maybe with that of a closing, maybe you could add to this, Christopher, about how you think about spaces of that ilk and what you're thinking about of making places.
So I'd like to just pick up on your question about authenticity, if I may, because I think that's actually a very interesting question, and the starting point is actually a change in business style that I think there's a generational shift that's linked with the move towards shared workspaces that is about being yourself in business, an idea that actually if you want to be successful, regardless whether you're a visual artist or a composer or a technology entrepreneur, then no longer are we in a world where you have to conform to certain expectations and present yourself in a way that is generic, that actually your route to success is being as much yourself and bring as much of your real personality into that as you can. And where I think you get with the working environments is that people who feel that way will affiliate to spaces that reflect them, that won't be generically designed spaces, that will be spaces where somebody has cared about what it looks like, and whoever's designed the space seeks to put themselves into the design and also allow space in that for each individual to modify something or add some of their own elements. So I think authenticity is a very, very central element of what's happening, not just in architecture and workspace design now, but in business generally. And I think that like it's such a chalk and cheese thing. Like a new generation entrepreneur going into an old style office, they will just turn around and walk out the door. That's an environment they feel horrified by. The idea that they and their team would sit in lights back, would sit in regimented rows and do it arrive at 9 o'clock in the morning, leave at 6 o'clock in the evening. It's so alien now. That I think that's creating very exciting new challenges for businesses like ours that are making the spaces for those businesses.
Can I just add to that? Because what we're seeing is evidence from larger businesses very quickly responding, realizing that actually the issue of talent for them, that they can no longer provide standard boxes for people to work in. So, well-known technology firms tend to be based in West London, but when I bring them to East London and I have a particular tour I take them on, actually they're saying this is real. This is actually what my staff want. And so I think it's as true, increasingly true now for more established, bright companies, realizing that the kind of conventional formats are no longer sustainable.
Yeah, but there's no such thing as authenticity. Come on. Authenticity just means that's how it is. I mean, 5 years' time, we'll be talking about the authenticity of the Canary Wharf glass building. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we could all move into one of those? I mean, I think Hackney was a disaster zone, and now it's an authenticity cultural hotspot. I mean, it's the same place.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, I think with that, open up any questions about the future here. Place? Nothing? Anyone? Okay, here we go. Yeah, true. It all goes back to Monty Python.
No, but I mean, let's go on about authenticity a bit more. Two cities I've been to in the last... Okay, well, let's take Berlin, right? Very authentic city, cheap rents, has all the ingredients to be a fantastic, explosive business, digital startup. It's starting now, but for years and years and years it failed. And nobody could understand why. I knew friends who left London because the prices were too high, set up their little design studios in Berlin, got so bored, found everyone so lazy, the pace so slow. It's like that even if you have all the ingredients on paper. But the two places I've been to in the last year that impressed me the most are Eindhoven. Eindhoven is just the most incredibly dynamic cultural and creative city I've ever been to. And it's the ugliest shithole as well. And Singapore, which is the least authentic city you can possibly imagine, has an amazing creative scene going on. It's this kind of paradoxical. There are no magic ingredients. There is no formula. I said again, there is no such thing as authenticity.
Go ahead, Mars. No, I've had my say on it.
You know, every city has a life cycle. You've read the book, or maybe you haven't, but there's a book called The Life and Death of Great Cities. At one time, Detroit was very authentic and was a powerhouse. You look at Austin just during the dot-com bust, where everything collapsed and tens of thousands of people were laid off. And Hackney was poor at one time, and now it's working its way back up. I think we all have to figure out how that when we plan for the future, that we're both authentic, but we're authentic smart. We're looking at how we look at the numbers, how we test the potency of people's ideas, what is state-of-the-art best practices for city planning, so that we grow in a very, very smart way. I think if you look at Austin today, we've got 1,500 food trailers. We have got the best climate in America for growing small businesses. We've got Samsung, Apple, IBM, Facebook, eBay. We have more foreign direct investment from across the planet than almost any other place. I think that authentic really has to do with what is going on now. What are we really thinking of? I found it very interesting that Austin has, and for those of you from Britain who may not know, Austin has a patron superhero. Austin's superhero is the Green Lantern. And you hear the mayor speak about it and other people speak about it. And what is his power? It's the power, if you have a willpower strong enough, you can make anything happen. And so when Austin talks about making us the live music capital of the world, the city council votes on it, and then so it's going to happen. So they just work on it. I don't know who came up with the idea that Austin is keep Austin weird, but people live and breathe it. They really want that to be where they are today. So I don't know where we're going to be in 10 years from now, but I think it's a very authentic community now. It's very smart in terms of the finances, AAA bond rating. The university is getting a new hospital, a new teaching facility. It's going to create 15,000 jobs, which is going to create a whole medical industry. We're going to try and get them to expand to Hackney. I mean, you know, I think that authentic is a really good discussion to have. Maybe the next session.
If I could just quickly pick up the question the lady asked. There's no mutual incompatibility between analysis and serendipity. Just to take some of the examples from East London, the whole transport infrastructure, for one thing, there's a vast computer model that's calculating passenger flows at each station and trying to make sure that the regularity of services is right. And that's been vital, actually, to the development of Shoreditch and now to Hackney Wick, the development of the overground network. And it's also linked the area to areas in South London, where now there's slightly less ridiculously expensive housing that is now within easy reach of the area. And like, you couldn't run a transport system like that without huge quantities of computer modeling. At the same time, at the more local scale, just day-to-day activities, almost everything good that happens is about chances that nobody could have predicted or controlled. And somehow you need to have both of those elements to make a city function in the way that creates the most well-being and the most commercial success.
There you go. All right.
It seems to me that gentrification, that dirty word, is the thing that kills authenticity. Is there any way to make gentrification okay and cool? Because as soon as we go away from favela chic and go into like how the village was, artists and cool and wonderful, now it's American Western England, it's that which kills the authenticity of heritage. Is there any way to sort of make that G word okay?
Something you're looking at HereEast.
No.
It's like the High Line in New York, that's like a freeway of Europeans now on it. The success of these spaces, sometimes does kill them, but then they do take on something else, something changes, and I think what your point, Marcus, is like, get over it. Just it's going to change, it's going to adjust, something happens, and that's what makes it interesting, I think. And
Well, I think that the whole, I don't want to get into a big gentrification, but I think that it's part of the natural cycle of how a city grows and regenerates and rebuilds itself. It's just when it gets out of hand. You don't want to displace people who want to stay if there's a financial reason that they can stay. If it's an elderly people who can't afford a 5-bedroom house and they want to sell and move to be near their family, that's gentrification. But it's good gentrification if they make money on it and they live with their family. If businesses gentrify, because in East Austin, the black population left. A big part of the black population left. So it left some of the black churches and the black businesses. They had to leave in order to deal with that or adjust. So some of it is good, some of it is bad, some of it is natural. But I think you have to have some kind of a balance to it and just be aware of it so that it doesn't displace people who have no other choice.
Yeah, I think the lexicon of all this stuff is really fascinating. Like, why is gentrification a bad word? It's like the gentrification sort of fixes up the authenticity, doesn't it, and makes sure it doesn't fall apart. I can't remember where I heard this, but I heard this recently. I can't remember whether I saw it on some graffiti or someone said it, but it was definitely ironic. It's like, Hackney was much better when it was shit. It sums it all up, doesn't it? Like, there's nostalgia for this time when things were authentic, and what we mean by authentic was nobody cared about it and let it go all scruffy. And now that's suddenly something that's prized, and then that attracts people who've got more money, and they come and clean it up and they move in, and that's somehow wrong. And then, like the Shoreditch, it can't be the same forever. Who wants it to be? Who wants a city that's not in flux, that's not having new money coming in, people moving out, areas that fall down and come back up again? That's the life cycle, isn't it? That's trees die and new ones are born.
But I think so. Kevin referred to Jane Jacobs and the life and death of American Citizen. One of the things that she talks about there is this life cycle that rundown neighborhoods attract creative people who then suddenly make them buzzing and desirable, and before you know it, all the rents have gone out, all the creative people are out, and it becomes a sterile neighborhood and then starts to decline again. And it is a kind of microscopic version of the boom and bust economic cycle, in just the same way that economists and politicians have been doing everything they can think of to try and stabilize that boom and bust cycle, because it's very destructive in a lot of ways. Similarly, city planners have been trying to have to reduce the extremes of that, and I think there is there's nothing wrong with change, and cities must change. If you try to freeze them or stop the change, they die or become horrible parodies of cities. But at the same time, there's a very active debate at the moment about whether there are urban development models which permit constant change and permit new communities to come in and permit landowners to see the value of their properties increase and to redevelop things. But at the same time, to do that in a way that enables elements of the artistic and creative communities to stay in part of the fabric, both living there and working there, so that kind of there's this idea of a balanced development, that you can avoid the kind of sterilization and collapse phase, that this idea that there might be a kind of stable, constantly changing balance. And right now, in the UK, the Hackney Wick and Fish Island and the old Olympic Park, which is the area where Richard's working and the area where I live now, that is the great laboratory, because there are these great empty sites. There are plans to build 20,000 homes, and you have Europe's biggest concentration of artists there, as well as huge opportunities for business. And so I think we've got a decade of opportunities to really experiment with different ways of keeping affordable elements that are available to the creative sectors and to early stage innovators, whilst you have a wider regeneration and development and increasing wealth of an area. But it's a very, very tricky balance.
Terrific. All right, try one more here. Back, just first. All right, you win. Okay.
I don't know what I don't.
All right.
Well, let's make sure they're not after me. Austin, as you know, is 39% Hispanic, 9% Asian, 9% Black, and within the Asian community is 30 different countries. And so the population is kind of going in the same way that you see Toronto and the other communities are going. We've made the conscious decision to use culture as an economic strength. We've got 5 chambers of commerce. We've got the Greater Austin Asian Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Austin Black Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Austin Gay and Lesbian Chamber, and the Greater Austin Chamber. Well, in each one of those, you've got people in Austin, they're still minorities, but they're not minorities in certain places where they're from. The people from Singapore or Vietnam or China, they speak the language, they've got business connections, and our local corporations want that knowledge and want them to help them expand into those countries to get the trade, because 95% of the trade of the world is outside the United States. And so every company out of Austin that grows and expands in any way, shape, or form successfully overseas, their revenues go up 5 times. So we're trying to use the cultural diversity of our community as an economic asset. And lastly, we're unique as a department in having cultural arts as a part of it and having music as a part of it. And we have, I think, $8 million a year from the hotel occupancy taxes that we give to the artists on a competitive basis. It's juried projects, and they perform to generate cultural tourism that is measured, as well as we have a creative ambassador program to get them to go overseas to merchandise their products. So we're very, very aware of the global marketplace and how the culture and diversity of Austin is probably our greatest strength outside of just the general creativity.
I think that's good. I mean, speaking for you guys, I mean, it seems like London has become such an amazing international city than it didn't used to be. And when you look at London and Paris, it was always, oh, the beauty of Paris. But the excitement of London being maybe uglier, different, you know, energetic because of the cultural mix. You know, if both were just purely English and purely French, they'd probably be both dull cities. But I think London has done an excellent job of being more open. Immigration and the mix and the craziness of it has made it a great place. And I think that's, you know, we are also in an island here in Texas. So, I mean, it seems like our island is also a mix that's different than other cities in Texas that makes Austin different.
I think that's a really good point, actually. 'Cause, I got taken out to lunch by a boutique venture capitalist last week who was sort of sniffing around, And he said, tell us about your business plan, all that kind of stuff. And at the end of it, you could tell he just lost interest. He said, yeah, if you're happy running a lifestyle business, which he meant as a put down. And actually, yeah, it's a lifestyle business. I really enjoy it. I don't have a business plan. I'm not seeking VC cash or anything like that. I'm comfortable with that. And I think in London, that's really, really common, actually. And it kind of freaks me out being at South by Southwest for the first time and seeing how much of the conversation is dominated by money. I mean, it's my upbringing. It's not like I'm anti-business. I just don't understand that world. And I think a lot of my community in London are the same. Whereas in New York, it's not like that at all.
All right, this is the last one.
Well, I really like your comment about trees dying when I was born, and it just reminded me, because I'm a long-term Hackney resident, that actually what's special about Hackney is we've got tons of really great green spaces and parks, and that's where people hang out and collaborate. And I've observed in Austin, people are really chatting to each other on the street, much more than Hackney. In Hackney, it's the parks, that's the kind of creative social space. Yeah, just like standing in the line, I just can't believe how friendly and open and welcoming it is.
You should go grocery shopping. It takes 10 minutes to get down the aisle. You go over all your food and say, oh, are you going to eat that? You know what I had is this. So this is how.
Oh my God, the taxi drivers here as well. The taxi drivers do not shut up. It's like, leave me alone. Just drive me.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you, you guys. It's excellent.
Thank you, Dave.
Hopefully. You bet. Great.